Rain had been falling since lunchtime. Not heavily. Just the steady sort of drizzle that seems to settle over Yorkshire without ever quite deciding whether to stop. I was sitting at the kitchen table in my little semi-detached house just outside York, watching droplets slide down the window, while a mug of tea slowly grew cold beside me. I should have made another cup. Instead, I kept glancing at my phone. It had become a habit over the past 8 months. Every morning there'd be a cheerful message. Every evening, we'd wish each other good night. Somewhere, between those moments, we'd exchange photographs, stories, a little jokes and memories that made the day seem a little less empty. The phone suddenly lit up. My heart lifted before I'd even picked it up. It was from Sarah, not my daughter. The woman I'd come to believe had wandered unexpectedly into my life when I thought that chapter had closed forever. I can't wait until we're finally together. I read the words twice, then smiled. For a man of 68, I'd begun smiling far more often than I had in years. I pictured the train journey we'd been planning, walking along the seafront, stopping in a little cafe for tea, talking without a screen between us for the very first time. It all felt so close now. I was still looking at the message when I heard the front door open. Granddaughter. Emily's voice drifted through the hallway. I'm in the kitchen, I called. A moment later, my granddaughter appeared, her school bag hanging from one shoulder, Rain still clinging to the sleeves of her blazer. Hi, love. She kissed me lightly on the cheek before dropping her bag beside the table. Mom said to see if you wanted anything from Tesco later. I'm all right. Thank you. She nodded, then happened to glance towards my phone, which was still lying beside my untouched tea. It couldn't have been more than a second, perhaps 2. The smile on her face disappeared. She leaned a little closer. Who's that? I felt myself smiling again. Just someone I've been talking to. The lady from Devon. That's the one. Emily looked at the screen for another brief moment. Then she frowned. Not dramatically. Just enough for me to notice. Granddaughter. Can I ask you something? Of course. She picked up my phone with surprising care. Her eyes moved from the latest photograph Sarah had sent to another I'd shown her weeks before, then back again. Finally, she looked at me. Why does every photo she sends have the same little flower in exactly the same corner? I laughed. It came out more naturally than I expected. What flower? That tiny white one. She pointed to the lower right-hand corner of the picture. I noticed it last time as well. I shrugged. It's probably something on her phone. Emily didn't laugh with me. She enlarged the image with her fingers, then opened another one. Again. She zoomed in. The same thoughtful expression stayed on her face. It's there again. I felt a faint chill despite the warm kitchen. Oh. I'm sure it's nothing. Maybe. She handed the phone back but didn't take her eyes off it. It just seems odd. Neither of us spoke for several seconds. Outside, rain tapped softly against the window. The kettle clicked as it cooled. I looked back at Sarah's smiling photograph. For 8 months, I'd seen comfort whenever I looked at that face. Now, for the first time, I found myself searching the corner of the picture instead. There it was, a tiny white flower, exactly where Emily had said it would be. I tried telling myself it meant absolutely nothing, yet somehow the kitchen no longer felt quite as warm. And for the first time since Sarah entered my life, I found myself wondering whether I'd been looking at love, or something else entirely. Looking back now, I often wonder whether Emily noticed that tiny white flower because she's 16, or because she'd grown up in a world where people question photographs before they believe them. My generation wasn't taught to think that way. We were taught that if someone looked you in the eye and spoke kindly, you trusted them until they gave you a reason not to. Perhaps that's why my story really began, long before Sarah ever sent her first message. It began 4 years earlier, when Margaret died. 43 years we'd been married, long enough that I could no longer remember what life had been like before her. She'd been beside me through every house move, every Christmas, every worry about money, every celebration when the children reached another milestone, when cancer finally took her. It felt as though someone had quietly removed the center of my life. People often ask whether grief becomes easier. In my experience, it doesn't become smaller. You simply learn to carry it more quietly. The house certainly didn't help. It was never large. But once Margaret was gone, it somehow felt twice the size. Rooms that had once been full of conversation became places I simply walked through. The silence wasn't dramatic. It was ordinary. And somehow that made it harder. My week settled into a routine. Every Tuesday morning, I'd drive to Tesco with the same shopping list. Milk, bread, tea bags, a few bits for the garden. The young lad on the till began recognizing me. Just the usual today. I always smiled. You know me too well. Back home, I'd spend an hour in the garden. Margaret had adored her roses. I couldn't bear the thought of letting them disappear. So I did my best to keep them alive. Some years they looked magnificent. Other years they seemed to miss her, just as much as I did. Most afternoons ended in the sitting room, with an old detective drama playing on the television. I'd watched some of those episodes so many times I already knew who the murderer was, before the opening credits had finished. Still, I left the television on. Not because I was watching it, because the voices made the house feel occupied. Sundays were the hardest. For 40 years we'd always shared a proper roast. Even when money had been tight. Even when the children had left home. Now I'd still cook one from time to time. Then find myself staring at the empty chair opposite mine before taking the first bite. Some evenings I wondered why I'd bothered. I'd often walk through the local park afterwards. Young parents pushed prams. Older couples wandered hand in hand. Friends sat on benches laughing over takeaway coffees. I was genuinely pleased for them. Yet every now and then I'd catch myself wondering what it felt like to have someone waiting for you at home. My children rang whenever they could. Sarah lived in Leeds. My son, Daniel, was down in Bristol. They both had busy lives, careers and families. I never blamed them. They'd become exactly the adults Margaret and I had hoped we'd raise. Still, visits slowly became fewer, not through lack of love, simply because life has a habit of filling every spare moment. Before going to bed each night, I'd stop beside the photograph of Margaret on the bookshelf. It had been taken during a holiday in Whitby years earlier. She was laughing at something I'd just said. I never could remember what the joke was. Night. Love. I'd whisper. It became part of my routine, almost without thinking. Old one. Old friends began disappearing too. Some moved closer to their children. Others went into care. A few passed away. The neighborhood itself changed. New families arrived. People hurried from cars to front doors without stopping for a chat. It wasn't unfriendly, just different. One wet autumn evening, after eating another quiet dinner on my own, I found myself sitting in the conservatory with the lights off. The reflection in the glass made the room seem even emptier. A question slipped into my mind so unexpectedly that it almost startled me. Could anyone ever want someone my age again? I tried to laugh at myself. 68. Gray hair. Arthritic knees. Who was I kidding? Yet the question refused to disappear. And looking back now, I realized that one lonely evening may have been the moment I became willing to believe almost anything that sounded like hope. A few days after that evening in the conservatory, I bumped into an old workmate outside the hardware shop. His name was Colin. We'd worked together for nearly 20 years before retiring. Though, these days we only cross paths now and then. You look well, he said, shaking my hand. I've had worse days. He chuckled. That's about as cheerful as electricians ever get. We stood chatting for a while about football, rising energy bills, and whose knees had become less reliable with age. Then he surprised me. You on Facebook? I've got an account. Use it. Not really. You should. I laughed. What for? Looking at pictures of people's holidays. No. He replied. Just talking to people. Keeps you connected. Seeing the look on my face, he quickly added, I'm not talking about dating websites or anything like that. Just groups. Gardening. Local history. Folk who like the same things. It sounded harmless enough. That evening I logged in properly for the first time in months. Colin had been right. There were groups for almost everything. Gardening enthusiasts, people sharing photographs of Yorkshire villages, fans of old British sitcoms. I spent an hour simply reading other people's conversations without saying a word. Weeks passed. I commented now and then on someone's roses or congratulated another member for growing prize-winning tomatoes. Nothing remarkable happened. Then, one Tuesday morning, a notification appeared. A friend request from Sarah Bennett. I looked at her profile. Around my age. Silver hair, tucked behind one ear. A warm smile. According to her page, she lived in Devon and had been widowed several years earlier. We shared a few gardening groups and even followed the same page dedicated to classic British comedies. I hesitated for a moment before accepting. There was no message straight away. Just a polite comment beneath a photograph I'd posted of Margaret's roses. They're beautiful. She must have loved her garden. I smiled. Most people simply wrote, "Lovely flowers." Sarah had noticed the caption mentioning Margaret. I thanked her. The next day she commented again, asking whether I'd managed to save a struggling hydrangea. A week later, she recommended a program about seaside railways. Little by little, our conversations moved into private messages. Nothing about them felt rushed. We spoke about favorite books, stubborn weeds, rainy holidays, and the best place for fish and chips. She mentioned walking along the Devon coast. I told her, Margaret and I had always loved Whitby. Funny, she wrote. I've always thought the sea makes people tell the truth. So have I. One evening, she asked gently, would you mind telling me about Margaret? Most people avoided speaking about my wife, worried they might upset me. Sorry I didn't. She listened. When I described how Margaret sang while baking on Sunday mornings, Sarah didn't change the subject. She simply replied, she sounds like someone who made a house feel like home. I sat looking at those words for a long time. She understood, or at least she seemed to. Months slipped by almost unnoticed. Every morning there was a cheerful message waiting. Morning. Hope you've slept well. Sometimes she'd send a photograph of flowers she'd spotted on a walk. Other days it was a steaming mug of tea beside an open book. Once she showed me an elderly Labrador she'd met on the beach. He insisted on saying hello. I laughed aloud. In return, I sent pictures of my garden. The robins that visited every morning, and the tomatoes I was still trying to grow without much success. Those ordinary conversations became the best part of my day. The neighbors noticed before I did. You've got your smile back, Mrs. Wilson said one afternoon over the garden fence. Even my daughter mentioned it during a Sunday phone call. You sound happier, Dad. I suppose I am. The truth was, I slept better than I had in years. The house no longer felt quite so silent. There was always someone to tell about the little things that happened during the day. Then one evening, after we'd spent nearly an hour talking about nothing more exciting than gardening and old episodes of Time's Dad's Army, Sarah sent a message that made me stop and read it twice. Maybe life gives us a second chance. I leaned back in my chair. For the first time since losing Margaret, I allowed myself to believe she might be right. But looking back now, I can't help wondering, had fate really brought the perfect person into my life? Or had someone patiently become exactly the person I was hoping to find? After Sarah wrote that perhaps life gives us a second chance, our conversations became part of the rhythm of my days. Before I even opened the curtains each morning, I'd reach for my phone, almost without fail. There'd be a message waiting. Morning. Handsome. Slept well. It made me smile every single time. I couldn't remember the last occasion someone had been pleased simply because I'd woken up. We began speaking on video calls. The first one lasted barely 5 minutes. I remember tidying the kitchen beforehand and changing into a clean jumper, feeling rather ridiculous for making such an effort. When her face finally appeared on the screen, the picture was grainy. She laughed. Oh dear. My internet's dreadful today. I can see you well enough. Can you? You're lucky. The picture froze for a moment before becoming blurry again. I promise I'm not usually this fuzzy. It doesn't matter. and it genuinely didn't. Just hearing her voice felt enough. The same thing happened during the next call, and the one after that. Sometimes the connection broke entirely. Sometimes the lighting in her room was so dim that I could barely make out her features. She always apologized. I really must sort this broadband out. I never questioned it. Technology had always seemed temperamental to me. My grandson complained about poor signal often enough. Why should Sarah's situation be any different? As the weeks passed, our conversations became longer. Even if the video itself never seemed to improve, she remembered everything. If I'd mentioned a GP appointment, she'd ask how it had gone. When my blood pressure tablets were changed, she reminded me to take them with breakfast. If you forget, she'd tease. I'll have to ring and nag you. She even kept an eye on football results, though I'd followed Leeds United all my life. I occasionally forgot when they were playing. She never did. Bad luck today. She'd write after a defeat. There's always next weekend. They were tiny things. But tiny things have a way of making people feel noticed. Whenever I had a difficult day, she somehow sensed it. One damp Wednesday afternoon, I'd been sorting through old photographs of Margaret. By evening, I felt unexpectedly low. I hadn't told Sarah, yet her message arrived as though she'd known. Some days are harder than others. Be kind to yourself tonight. I sat staring at those words. Perhaps it was coincidence. Perhaps it wasn't. Either way, they brought comfort, without realizing it. I gradually stopped ringing some of my old friends quite so often. Colin invited me to the pub one Friday. I might give it a miss. I said, "You've become hard to pin down." I've just been keeping busy. The truth was, Friday evenings had quietly become our time. Sarah and I would make a cup of tea, settle into our favorite chairs, and spend an hour talking about everything and nothing. I looked forward to those conversations more than anything else in the week. She had a habit of calling me something that made me laugh every time. "My handsome gentleman." The first time she said it, I actually looked over my shoulder, convinced she must be talking to someone else. I haven't been called handsome in decades. Then people haven't been paying attention. No one had spoken to me like that since Margaret was alive. I felt my cheeks growing warm, ridiculous at my age, yet secretly rather wonderful. Slowly, I began taking more care with myself. I shaved every morning instead of every other day. I bought 2 new shirts from Marks and Spencer. Even the barber commented, "Going somewhere nice." You could say that. Eventually, we decided there was no point waiting any longer. "I'd love to see Devon," I told her, "and I'd love to show you." I booked a train ticket, for the first time in years. I felt the sort of excitement usually reserved for children before Christmas. I imagined meeting her on the platform, seeing her smile without a screen between us, hearing her laugh in person. 3 days before I was due to travel, she called. She sounded upset. "I'm so sorry." "What is it?" "My sister's been taken ill." "Oh no. I can't leave her." "Of course you can't. I feel dreadful canceling. There'll be other opportunities. I promise." I believed her without hesitation. After all, family comes first, doesn't it? We rearranged the visit without a single disagreement. When the call ended, I felt disappointed, but not suspicious. That's what people in love do. They forgive. They understand. Yet, as I folded the unused train tickets and slipped them into the kitchen drawer, one quiet thought refused to leave me. If 2 people truly wanted to meet, why did something always seem to get in the way? After we canceled the trip to Devon, I told myself not to be disappointed. Life has a habit of interrupting plans. Margaret and I had postponed holidays more than once because of poorly timed illnesses or unexpected family commitments. Things happened. That's simply what life was like. Sarah apologized several times over the next few days. "I hate letting you down." "You haven't. I feel as though I've ruined everything." "You've done nothing of the sort. We'll make it happen soon." "I know we will." I meant every word. If anything, she seemed even more affectionate after canceling. Her morning messages became longer. She'd ask whether I'd slept well, remind me to wrap up before gardening, and tell me not to skip lunch. Sometimes, she'd send a little voice message instead of typing. Take care of yourself today. Handsome gentleman. I'd catch myself smiling before I'd even finish listening. Those small moments slowly outweighed the disappointment of not meeting. Yet, little by little, things began to feel slightly untidy. Nothing serious. Nothing that could easily be explained. One afternoon she mentioned having worked as a teaching assistant for years. A fortnight later, while talking about retirement, she referred to running a small gift shop before her husband died. I frowned for a moment, then convinced myself I'd remembered wrongly. Memory has a habit of playing tricks as you get older. A few days later, she mentioned the elderly couple who lived next door. Not long afterwards, she casually referred to living in a detached cottage with no close neighbors at all. Again, I dismissed it. Perhaps she'd been talking about her previous home. Perhaps I'd misunderstood. It wasn't worth making a fuss over. Then there were the photographs. I'd become rather fond of them. Flowers from her garden. A mug of tea beside a novel. Her dog stretched out in the sunshine. The sea on quiet mornings. They always looked lovely. Almost too lovely. The colors seemed unusually bright. The lighting always seemed perfect. Even rainy days looked strangely beautiful. I admired her talent for photography. I never questioned it. Until Emily came round one Saturday afternoon. She was helping me sort through a box of old family albums when my phone buzzed. It's Sarah, I said with a smile. Emily looked over as I opened the message. Another photograph. This time it was a basket of freshly picked roses. Those are nice, Emily said. They are. She hesitated. Can I ask something? Go on. Have you ever searched any of her pictures? I laughed. What do you mean? Like, checked whether they've been posted somewhere else. I shook my head. Why would I do that? Just to make sure they're hers. Emily. I smiled patiently. Sarah's from another generation. So are you? Exactly. We don't spend our lives pinching pictures off the internet. Emily didn't argue. She simply nodded. Maybe. But I could see she wasn't convinced. Later that evening my daughter rang. Dad. Emily mentioned she'd been talking to you. She worries too much. She only cares about you. I know. Have you definitely met this lady? We've spoken hundreds of times. You know that's not what I meant. Isahil. I trust her. There was a brief silence. Then Sarah, my daughter. Not the woman in Devon, said quietly. I just don't want to see you get hurt. After we ended the call, I found myself sitting alone in the conservatory, replaying both conversations. Emily's questions, my daughter's concern. Neither of them had accused Sarah of anything. Neither had been unkind. They simply sounded worried. When Sarah messaged later that evening, she seemed to sense something had changed. You've been quieter today. I've just had a lot on my mind. I'm sorry. What are you apologizing for? I hope nobody's trying to fill your head with doubts. I stared at the screen. Before I could answer, another message arrived. You deserve happiness. Then another. I'd never do anything to hurt you. And finally, I care about you more than you probably realize. Reading those words, the uncertainty I'd been feeling began to soften. She wasn't angry. She wasn't defensive. She was simply kind. Kinder than ever. Looking back now, I realized the timing was almost perfect. Just as doubt quietly began to grow, she gave me exactly the reassurance I was longing to hear. The question was, were these little inconsistencies nothing more than ordinary misunderstandings, or the first cracks in a carefully constructed illusion? A few days after that conversation, life seemed to settle back into its familiar rhythm. Emily stopped asking questions. My daughter didn't mention Sarah again, and I told myself I'd been worrying over nothing. Looking back, I think that's exactly what I wanted. Not proof, just permission to stop doubting. Sarah's messages became even more thoughtful. She'd remind me to put a scarf on before going into the garden. She'd ask how my blood pressure was after my latest GP appointment. If I mentioned I'd had a restless night, She'd tell me to have an afternoon nap instead of overdoing things. You spend too much time looking after everyone else. She wrote one morning, "It's your turn now." No one had said anything like that to me in years. I found myself believing that perhaps she understood me better than anyone else. Then, one Tuesday evening, she asked if we could talk. Her voice sounded quieter than usual, almost hesitant. "Everything all right?" I asked. There was a long pause. I nearly didn't ring. "Why?" "Because I'm ashamed." I frowned. "Whatever it is, just tell me." She let out a slow breath. "I've got a bit of a problem." I waited. "My bank has frozen my account." "What do you mean?" "They've flagged some unusual activity." "Can they do that?" "They say it's routine. Apparently, it'll all be sorted in a few days." She laughed softly, though there was no humor in it. "Trust this to happen just when I need to pay a solicitor." I listened quietly. She didn't ask me for anything. Instead, she apologized for talking about it. "I shouldn't burden you with my problems." "You're not. I'll sort it somehow." Another silence followed. Then she added, almost in a whisper, "I just hate feeling helpless." There was something about the way she said those words that stayed with me. No dramatique. Not desperate. Simply embarrassed. For the next couple of days, she barely mentioned it. We carried on talking about ordinary things. The weather, my roses, a detective program we'd both watched the previous evening. Then, on Friday night, she rang again. "I've been trying to work something out." "Any luck?" "Not really." She hesitated. "I don't want you to think I'm asking for money." "I haven't thought that." "I couldn't bear it if you did." I sat quietly, waiting. "The solicitor's given me until Monday." "How much are we talking about?" "No." She answered almost immediately. "I shouldn't have said anything." "Sarah, it's not your responsibility." "Tell me." Another pause. "About £2,000. The figure made me swallow. It wasn't a fortune, but it wasn't pocket money either. She spoke before I could answer. "If it's difficult, please forget I ever mentioned it. I don't want this to come between us." "It won't. I'll manage somehow." She never pleaded. She never cried. She never raised her voice. Instead, she simply sounded disappointed in herself. Then she said something that caught me completely off guard. "I thought we trusted each other." Not accusing, not manipulative, just quietly sad. I looked across the kitchen at the empty chair where Margaret had always sat. If our positions had been reversed, if someone I loved genuinely needed help, wouldn't I have done exactly the same? The following morning I drove into town, standing at the counter in my bank. I hesitated only once before confirming the transfer. The cashier looked up politely. "You're happy to proceed?" "Yes, I'm sure." By the time I reached home, the money had gone. Less than an hour later, my phone rang. It was Sarah. She was crying. "I don't know how to thank you." "You don't have to. You've saved me. I've only helped someone I care about." "My handsome gentleman." She laughed through her tears. "I promise I'll repay every penny." For the next week, everything felt almost perfect. She seemed lighter, more cheerful. We joked about finally arranging another visit. She even talked about which cafe we'd try first when we eventually met. I remember thinking that perhaps Emily and my daughter had worried for nothing. Perhaps kindness really was rewarded. Then, just as life began to feel wonderfully ordinary again, Sarah sent another message. "I'm so sorry. Something else has happened." As I stared at those words, a quiet unease settled somewhere deep inside me. If helping someone you love feels completely natural, at what point does kindness become something else entirely? After Sarah's latest message, I told myself not to panic. Everyone has bad luck from time to time. The first problem had been unfortunate. A second one was simply unfortunate again. At least, that was what I chose to believe. She explained that another delay had stopped her from accessing her money. There was paperwork to sort out, she said, and she felt dreadful that it had happened so soon after I'd helped her. "I'm so ashamed." David, you've nothing to be ashamed of. I hate that you're seeing me like this. I know you'll sort it. She thanked me for understanding. But this time she didn't ask for money. She simply ended the call by saying, "You're the only person who never makes me feel like a burden." Those words stayed with me. Then, something unexpected happened. Emily came round after school carrying her laptop. "Granddaughter, can I show you something?" She looked nervous. I smiled. "Of course." She sat opposite me at the kitchen table. "I've been looking into Sarah." Immediately, I felt my shoulders tense. "You don't need to do that." "I know. But I did." She took a deep breath. "I promise I'm not trying to upset you." I nodded, though I wasn't sure I believed her. She opened her laptop. "I searched one of the photos she sent you." I frowned. "What do you mean?" "Searched it. It's called a reverse image search." She clicked on the screen. To my surprise, several identical photographs appeared. The same smiling face, the same picture, but different names beside each one. This can't be right. Emily looked at me gently. I thought maybe it was a mistake too. She clicked another result, then another. Each one showed Sarah's photograph attached to a different profile. Some claimed she lived in Devon. Others said London. One even claimed Australia. I stared at the screen. There must be some explanation. I hope there is. She closed the laptop. "I just wanted you to know." That evening my daughter came over. Emily had already spoken to her. Nobody raised their voice. Nobody accused me of anything. Sarah put the kettle on while I sat silently at the table. "Dad," she said softly, "we're worried. I can see that. We're not laughing at you. I never said you were. We love you." The words hung in the air. Emily quietly reopened her laptop. She showed me more search results, articles about romance scams, warnings from banks, stories that sounded uncomfortably familiar, daily messages, months of trust, promises of meeting, unexpected financial emergencies. I pushed my chair back. "This doesn't prove it's Sarah." "No," Emily admitted. "It doesn't. But it means you should slow down." For several seconds, nobody spoke. Then, I heard myself say something that surprised even me. "You all think I'm a fool." Sarah reached across the table and gently held my hand. "No. We think you're lonely." Those words hurt far more than if she'd called me foolish. Because they were true. That night, I told Sarah, the woman in Devon, about the conversation. She listened quietly. When I finished, she sighed. "I'm so sorry. They found your pictures online. I know exactly what this is." "What?" She sounded tired. "It happens all the time." "What does?" "My photographs have been stolen before." I blinked. "They have. Fake accounts. People pretending to be me." She gave a sad little laugh. "I suppose it's the strange world we live in now." The explanation sounded believable, perhaps because I wanted it to. Then she added something else. "You know, after someone loses a husband or wife, families often become overprotective." I didn't reply. "They're frightened you'll be hurt." "I know. But sometimes..." She hesitated. "They can't bear the thought of someone else making you happy." The sentence unsettled me, not because I believed my children were cruel, because it planted a tiny seed of doubt. The following days felt different. When Sarah, my daughter, rang, I kept the conversation short. When Emily sent me an article about online fraud, I didn't open it. I convinced myself they simply didn't understand what Sarah and I had built together. One Sunday afternoon, Emily left my house with tears in her eyes. I watched from the front window as she walked towards her mother's car. Before getting in, she whispered something I couldn't quite hear. "Laughter." Sarah told me what it had been. Emily had looked at her and quietly said, "We're running out of time." As I stood alone in the hallway, I couldn't shake the feeling that a choice was creeping closer. Would I believe the family who had loved me my entire life, or the woman who had made me believe I could be loved again? For the next few days, I tried to carry on as though nothing had changed. I watered the roses. I walked to the shops. I watched the evening news with the sound turned a little louder than necessary. But wherever I went, Emily's words followed me. We're running out of time. I wanted to dismiss them. Instead, they seemed to grow louder every day. On Saturday afternoon, Emily rang. Granddaughter. Could you come over? What for? I just want to show you something. I'm not sure there's any point. Please. There was something in her voice that reminded me of when she was little and had fallen off her bicycle. Not panic, just quiet determination. I agreed. When I arrived, she already had her laptop open on the dining table. My daughter made tea, but said very little. No one seemed interested in proving me wrong. They simply wanted me to look. Emily turned the screen towards me. I've put everything in order. She wasn't showing me opinions. She was showing me facts. The first photograph Sarah had ever sent me. Then the exact same photograph on another website. Different name. Different location. Another image. Again. Identical. This time attached to a warning about romance fraud. Then another. And another. Every picture I'd treasured over the past 8 months seemed to belong to someone else. There must be an explanation. I whispered. Emily nodded. I thought that too. She clicked another page. An online forum where victims had shared messages they'd received. My stomach tightened. One message began. Good morning. Handsome gentleman. I hope you slept well. I felt my mouth go dry. Sarah had written those exact words to me dozens of times. Emily scrolled further. Another message. Maybe life gives us a second chance. Then another. You're the only person who understands me. The wording was almost identical. I pushed my chair back. No. My daughter reached across the table. Dad. No. This isn't her. We wish it wasn't. I stood up and walked towards the window. Outside, children were kicking a football across the grass as though nothing in the world had changed. Inside, my own world was beginning to come apart. I've spoken to her. I know. I've heard her laugh. I know. She knows things about me nobody else could. Emily spoke gently. Because you told her. The room fell silent. I couldn't answer. Then my phone vibrated. Sarah. For one foolish second. Relief flooded through me. I opened the message. My heart stopped. Good morning. Michael. I've been thinking about you all night. My handsome gentleman. Michael. Not David. Michael. A second later the message disappeared. This message was deleted. Almost immediately, another one arrived. I'm so sorry. That was meant for my cousin Michael. I stared at the screen without blinking. The first message had only been visible for a few seconds. Long enough. Long enough to know exactly what I'd seen. The same words. The same affection. Sent to another man. Emily didn't say a word. She didn't need to. My hands began to shake so badly I almost dropped the phone. Everything I'd defended. Everything I'd believed. Every argument with my family. Every pound I'd transferred. Every hopeful plan. It all collapsed in the space of a single mistaken message. I lowered myself slowly into the chair. I've been so stupid. My daughter was beside me before I'd finished speaking. No. Dad. I should have known. She wrapped her arms around me exactly as she had the day we buried Margaret. You loved someone. Tears I'd been holding back for weeks finally came. Not because of the money. Though losing it hurt. Not even because Sarah wasn't real. But because I suddenly understood that the future I'd been clinging to had never existed. A few days later, officers from the bank's fraud team and the police visited the house. They explained that the accounts I'd paid into had already been linked to criminal activity overseas. They would try to recover what they could. But they wanted to be honest. Most of the money had already disappeared. I nodded without really hearing them. The following morning I sent one final message to Sarah. Why? It was read. No reply ever came. By lunchtime, her profile had vanished. The messages stopped. The calls stopped. The silence returned. Only this time, it somehow felt even louder than before. As I sat alone in the kitchen that evening, I found myself asking one question I never thought I'd have to face again. After losing both my savings and the hope I'd rebuilt, could I ever trust another human being again? For weeks after Sarah disappeared, I barely left the house unless I had to. The kitchen felt strangely familiar again. The same clock ticked above the doorway. The same kettle whistled every morning. The same empty chair stood opposite mine. Only now. Every notification sound made my stomach tighten. I stopped checking my phone. Not because I no longer wanted company. Because I was frightened of believing another lie. The police kept me informed as their investigation continued. One afternoon, Detective Inspector Collins rang. "Mr. Harris, we've made some progress." I wasn't sure I wanted to hear it. "We've identified part of the network involved." He explained that officers in Britain had been working alongside investigators overseas. Several suspects had been arrested during coordinated raids. Computers, mobile phones, and bank records had all been seized. The accounts I'd transferred money into were linked to dozens of victims across different countries. It wasn't just me. Not even close. A week later, I was invited to meet one of the investigators. He spread several files across the table. Each one represented another victim. A retired teacher from Kent, a widower from Manchester, a grandmother from Cornwall, an ex-lorry driver from Newcastle. Different lives, different stories. The same carefully planned deception. "We've spoken to hundreds of people," he said quietly. "Hundreds." He nodded. "They all believed they were in genuine relationships." I looked down at the photographs. Some smiled. Some looked exhausted. Some reminded me painfully of myself. I thought I was the only one. "You're certainly not." Those words changed something inside me. For weeks I'd been calling myself foolish. Weak. Naive. Now I realized the criminals hadn't chosen me because I lacked intelligence. They'd chosen me because I'd lost someone I loved. Because I was lonely. Because I still believed people generally meant what they said. The detective leaned forward. "You weren't targeted because you were gullible. You were targeted because you were kind." I don't think I'll ever forget hearing that. Only a small portion of the money was recovered. Most of it had vanished, long before the investigation began. Oddly enough. By then, the money no longer hurt as much as the betrayal. What I wanted back couldn't be refunded. Time, trust, hope. Emily visited almost every weekend after that. One Saturday, she placed a leaflet on the table. "What's this?" "There's a meeting at the village hall." I glanced at it. "Protecting older people from online fraud." "I don't think I'm ready." "You don't have to speak." I wouldn't know what to say. She smiled gently. "Just come." So I did. I sat quietly near the back, hoping nobody would notice me. Then one of the organizers asked whether anyone had experienced online fraud personally. The room fell silent. Before I could change my mind, I slowly stood up. "My name's David." My voice shook, and I thought I'd found love after losing my wife. For the next 20 minutes, I told them everything. Not every detail, just the truth. The messages, the promises, the money, the warning signs I'd ignored. When I finished, nobody laughed. Nobody judged me. Instead, an elderly gentleman walked over and quietly squeezed my shoulder. "I nearly sent £5,000 to someone last month." He swallowed hard. "After hearing you." He paused. "I won't." Driving home that evening, I realized something unexpected. For the first time since everything had happened, I didn't feel ashamed. If my mistake could stop even one other person from losing their savings or their heart, then perhaps it wasn't only a tragedy. Perhaps it could become a warning. Perhaps it could even become something useful. Emily looked across at me from the passenger seat. "You were brave today, Granddad." I smiled. "I don't know about brave." "I do." Several months later, as I was watering Margaret's roses, my phone vibrated with a new message request. I looked down at the screen. "Hello. I came across your profile and thought you seemed like a lovely gentleman." Once, I would have opened it without hesitation. This time, I quietly deleted it. Then I went back to the garden, where Emily was laughing as she tried to keep the family dog from digging up the flower beds. As I watched her, I found myself wondering, Could helping complete strangers avoid the same mistake I'd made? Finally, heal the part of me that still believed I had failed. Several months have passed since everything fell apart. The seasons have changed. The roses in the garden have flowered and faded once more. Life has found its rhythm again. Although not the one I imagined when Sarah first came into it. One Saturday afternoon, I was sitting at the same kitchen table where Emily had first noticed that tiny white flower in the corner of Sarah's photographs. The rain had gone. Sunlight streamed through the window instead. There was a fresh pot of tea between us. And Emily was cutting generous slices of homemade Victoria sponge she'd baked with her mum that morning. "I think I've put too much jam in it," she said. I smiled. "I've never heard anyone complain about too much jam." She laughed. "Good answer." For a little while we talked about ordinary things. Her GCSE results. My tomatoes, which still refused to grow properly. The neighbor's cat, which had somehow decided my garden belonged to him. The conversation wasn't remarkable, and perhaps that was exactly why it meant so much. Not long ago, silence had filled this kitchen. Now there was laughter. Not constant, not loud, but real. Emily looked across the table. "You seem happier." "I think I am. Even after everything." I thought about the question before answering. Not because of everything. In spite of it. She nodded as though she understood. Maybe she did. The truth is, loneliness hasn't disappeared. It doesn't simply vanish because time passes. There are still evenings when I catch myself looking towards Margaret's chair. There are still moments when I reach for the phone before remembering there isn't a message waiting. And yes, I still miss the future I believed I was going to have. Not the woman who invented it. The hope itself, that took longer to let go of. The money is mostly gone. I've accepted that now. Margaret and I worked hard for it. And I wish things had ended differently. But every Sunday, when my daughter and Emily come round for lunch, I'm reminded that what truly mattered was never sitting in a bank account. It was sitting around the table. Family. Conversation. People who loved me enough to risk making me angry because they couldn't bear to see me hurt. I used to think they were trying to take something away from me. Now I know they were trying to give something back. The truth, even when it was painful. These days, I still volunteer at community meetings now and then. Whenever I speak, I tell people not to be embarrassed if they've been deceived. Scammers don't look for foolish people. They look for decent people. People who trust. People who have spent a lifetime believing that kindness deserves kindness in return. They study loneliness the way a gardener studies the weather. They know exactly when someone is longing for another chance. But I've learned something else as well. Real love never asks you to drift away from the people who've stood beside you for years. It doesn't ask for secrecy. It doesn't ask you to choose between your family and your future. It certainly doesn't ask you to prove your feelings with money. If someone truly cares for you, they'll want the people who already love you to feel welcome too. Before Emily left that afternoon, she carried our empty teacups into the kitchen. She turned back with a smile. "You know, Granddaughter." "What?" "I'm really glad you listened in the end." "So are we?" After she had gone, I remained at the table for a while. The house was quiet again, but it wasn't the same kind of quiet. I glanced towards Margaret's empty chair and smiled gently. Life hadn't become perfect. It never would. I'd lost my wife. I'd lost my savings. I'd lost the dream of a second love that had never really existed. Yet I hadn't lost the people who mattered most. And somehow, that made all the difference. So if someone appeared in your life tomorrow, saying exactly what your heart has been longing to hear, would you recognize the warning signs before it was too late? I hope, for your sake, that you would.